Beth Pinsker. I'm a financial planning columnist at MarketWatch, and today we're here with Ai-jen Poo, who is one of the leading advocates for caregivers in the country. As baby boomers get older, caregiving has become a major economic issue, touching on everything from worker productivity to healthcare costs to immigration policy. Ai-jen leads the charge to protect the rights of the people who provide that care, whether they are paid workers or unpaid family members. She advocates for better working conditions and pay, and she is the co-founder of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and Caring Across Generations. She's also the author of the book, The Age of Dignity, Preparing for the Elder Boom in a Changing America. Welcome, Ai-jen. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get started by talking about where caregiving fits into the larger economic picture of the United States. A lot of people push aside this work as inconsequential, but it really matters to the greater economy. And how do you convince people? What do you tell them to make them believe that?
Well, I think everyone in their own way can feel the pressure because we're all impacted by the fact that the baby boom generation is aging. 10,000 of us turn 65 every single day, every 8 seconds. So even as we're chatting here, somebody's turning 65. And we're living longer than ever thanks to advances in healthcare and technology. And we have also millennials having children, right? Families. And so on every side of the generational spectrum, families are facing more pressure when it comes to caregiving responsibilities. As we live longer, we are also more prone to chronic illnesses like Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, which require care. And right now in America, about 60% of the workforce earns less than $60,000 per year. And the average cost of a nursing home is $100,000 per year. So the math is not mathing for everyday families in America, and we don't really have programs in place to help people afford care. So people are piecing it together, coming in and out of the workforce, overstretched family caregivers trying to make it work with very little in the form of respite care or options that are affordable. And so we're all kind of feeling the pressure, and the truth is it's having a huge impact on the economy, right? Our ability to sustain in the workforce and contribute amidst all of this pressure is really compromised.
And the healthcare costs, how do you explain how it impacts healthcare costs in terms of the amount of care that gets done at home versus a much more expensive care setting?
If you ever work as a governor in a state, you'll look at your budget for Medicaid and you'll realize that a huge amount of your budget is Medicaid, and a huge amount of that goes to nursing home care and institution-based care for older adults and people with disabilities. Meanwhile, if you put more investment in home and community-based services, you can actually deliver the same care in the context that most people prefer, because most of us want to age at home and in the community. And so, and from a family standpoint as well, having your loved one close and able to live in the context that they're familiar with, connected to their lives and their communities, is huge in terms of quality of life for everyone involved.
The costs involved to individual families is one of the major concerns that a lot of families have. They're pressed to pay as little as they can because they can't afford it. But the people then who are getting the wages are getting less than their work is worth. So how does that math?
It really doesn't, to be honest. And the truth is, these are jobs that aren't going to be automated anytime soon. You can't outsource them. They're jobs that enable family caregivers to go to work. They enable a dignified quality of life. If we raise the wages and made these jobs good jobs for the 21st century, 22nd century, they could be a pathway to real economic opportunity in a ripple effect for their own families, but also the families they support, while making a good quality of life possible for older adults and people with disabilities in our lives. It's such a win-win-win. And the challenge has been that people in America don't have more money to pay for care.
Right.
That's where the math doesn't math, and why it's so important that we think about public investments in our caregiving systems. When we were able, during COVID, during the American Rescue Plan, we were able to raise the funding for Medicaid home and community-based care, which allowed for many states to raise wages, allowed for many people to get more access to home-based care. That's the kind of investment in our foundation, our economic foundation, that supports families, working people to be able to go to work, and quality of life when we know we need it.
Let's talk about immigrant caregivers in particular. Immigrants make up a large part of the paid caregiving workforce.
30%.
30%. And there's a lot of urgency to their plight right now. And a lot of it is very political. What are you hearing from the caregivers that are in your constituency, and what is happening on the ground?
I am hearing a tremendous amount of fear, and many people who are afraid to go to work because of the potential of being kidnapped and separated from family members, and they're afraid for their children who, on their way to school, have seen horrific things happening in the community. And I've talked to a lot of families who have the caregivers who've been with them for over a decade, supporting a loved one with an intellectual disability, and who is their main portal to and channel to connect to the rest of the world, disappeared overnight. And it's almost like having the foundation for your family pulled from underneath you. And it's really devastating. It's disruptive, and truly there's no way we can meet our country's need for care without immigrants. I mean, it's such a foundational backbone of our care infrastructure and system here.
Well, let's turn to some solutions now. You speak, you go to rallies, you come and do interviews like this. What happens behind the scenes? What are the things that we don't see that you do when you're doing advocacy work?
Well, I am waiting for calls from, for example, today in Chicago, there is a case of a young girl who is 16, whose primary caregiver, her father, was just detained, and she is getting treated for stage 4 cancer. And so the hearing today will define whether or not her father can be released and whether they can be together in this time when she needs him the most. And so I'm getting those stories, following those stories, amplifying those stories to make sure that people know what family caregivers are going through in this moment. We're also preparing for the Affordable Care Act for the cost of health insurance to be increased and what that will mean for caregivers, for care workers. There are Medicaid cuts that are anticipated for next year, so we are working with advocates in states to make sure that people's services are protected and as many jobs in home care are protected as possible.
We talked about elder care a little bit. On the child care front, it's one of the issues in the New York mayor's race about making child care either more affordable or free for some people.
Yes.
Where does that fit into the puzzle?
It's huge because we have 33 million households in America with young children who require child care. So in those instances, working parents are having to make impossible choices between working and care. And so we are advocating for more affordable child care options for more American families. There's also this dynamic of the 11 million in the sandwich generation. That's you and me, who are squeezed between the pressures of caring for older people in our lives who need more assistance and young children. And those pressures are intense.
Yes. In fact, you wrote about some of that just recently. You posted about your caregiving experience this summer with your mother-in-law.
Yes.
How did that, and there's, I think the number is there are 63 million family caregivers out there, according to, I was one of them, you were one of them. What can you share about that experience and how it shaped what you plan to do in the future? Like, did you see any new needs that people should be addressing?
So my mother-in-law is one of my favorite people in the world, and people are constantly evolving, and what's happened to her as she has aged is she's become more kind and more generous and more loving, and even the days that she doesn't remember who I am, she tells me that I'm the most beautiful person she's seen, and it makes everything better. And it's also been incredibly, incredibly challenging. And what I've seen is the incredible cost of care, where somebody who worked hard her whole life, single mom, raised 2 boys, and as a therapist, got a PhD late in life, and just did so many things right, saved up, bought a home in the suburbs of Indianapolis, and the second that her care needs increased and she had to move into an assisted living facility and now in memory care, she literally decades of wealth disappearing in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
And that is my fear, is that this core part of our dream in this country of economic mobility, where one generation can do better than the next, the cost of care is really gutting that dream, that pathway into mobility and a greater future for our children and our children's children is deeply undermined by this profound and unsustainable cost, which is care for our loved ones.
So if you could sum up 3 things that would be useful to do that you think could help alleviate some of this care crisis, what would those 3 things be?
I would say really have a plan for your own care and the care for the people in your life, and have open conversations early when you're not in a time of crisis about what you envision and what would feel dignified to you and to the people you love. Have it be a part of how we talk about our plans as families, because too often we don't get there until we're in a moment of crisis, which is the worst time to think things through. So that's one. The second is to work collectively to try to change our policies, to make care more visible in our budgets, to let our elected officials know that care should be a priority. Not just for our individual families. There is a limit to what individuals can afford and build on our own. We need systems, we need policies to support us, and the math isn't mathing, and the workers are not sustainable in this current system. We've got to change it. We're not ready for the future until we do. And so that is a message for our elected officials, for our candidates. We have to prioritize care.
What do you think in terms of practicalities? Would that be in the form of tax credits? Are those the most useful? Or is it in terms of funding facilities so that they can charge less?
I think that first in the Medicaid program, which is the only way that most people who need assistance with long-term care can get it in our country, there's a program called Home and Community-Based Services.
Yes.
And it is underfunded, and there are 700,000 people on waiting lists waiting for services. And we could address that. We could fund that program so that the families who need care in the home can receive it, and so that the workers, the 70% of home care workers in America who work through the funds in that program, can actually have living wages. That would be a game changer in just establishing the foundation.
The number one question that people have about Medicare, and the number one misunderstanding, is that people think Medicare covers long-term care costs, and it doesn't. Should Medicare cover long-term care costs?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be a game changer. Even if we just started with home-based care, it would be a game changer for people. But I really do believe that Medicare should be modernized. It's been 60 years and the world has changed. Our life expectancy has changed. Our workforce has changed. We need more care than ever before. And Medicare was put into place to help us afford that as we age.
This has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for being here today. Check back often on MarketWatch for more news about caregiving and the greater economy and how this all affects your family and your wallet.